Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy, and I have for you right now another Dump the Corruption show. It's called The Threat of Fascism Again, and we'll be looking at a new article from Tom Hartman, who writes a lot about this subject, and I stream a lot about it, so there's a real good match there. So with that, I am going to move right to the article and we'll get started. Oh, gee, I think I've got a couple of folks here on such short notice. That's amazing. The title of this piece by Tom is, excuse me while I get rid of this noise, "We ignore the ongoing collapse of American democracy at our peril," and this photo is one of, excuse me, supporters of former U.S. President and 2024 presidential hopeful Donald Trump watch him speak at a Commit to Caucus rally in Las Vegas, Nevada on January 27, 2024. Tagline of this is "Fascism can happen here." We know this because it is happening here. Unless more people wake up and fight back, it will be too late. This is by Tom Hartman on February 3rd, 2024 from Common Dreams. Like an alcoholic family, I won't discuss alcoholism, proving Don Quixote's warning never to mention rope in the hope of a man who has been hanged. Far too many Americans are unwilling to acknowledge or even discuss the ongoing collapse of democracy in the United States. We see it in everything from our last two Republican presidents having lost the national vote, but taking office anyway, to the extreme gerrymandering happening in every red state in the country, to the naked bribery of our legislators and Supreme Court justices. And our media exclude it from almost every conversation. Networks run promotions mentioning Trump's indictments, but never completely fail to point out that he's calling for the end of democracy in America, the suspension of the Constitution, and playing the role of dictator on day one. My wife, Bonnie, when talking to others about Trump, never fails to mention that he's talking about the suspension of the Constitution and the end of democracy in America. President Jimmy Carter took it head on when he told me on my radio program that the Citizens United decision, which brought us this crisis. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little garbled here. Quote, violates the essence of what made America a great country in its political system. Okay, this is Tom's quote from Jimmy Carter. Now, it's just an oligarchy with unlimited political bribery being the essence of getting the nominations for president or to elect the president. Excuse me. And the same thing applies to governors and U.S. senators and Congress members. So now we've just seen a complete subversion of our political system as a payoff to major contributors who want and expect and sometimes get favors for themselves after the election's over. And he might have mentioned also get favors for themselves before the next election starts. This complete subversion of our political system grew in large part out of Richard Nixon's 1972 appointment of tobacco lawyer and right-wing extremist Lewis Powell to the Supreme Court. Powell, in 1971, had authored the infamous Powell Memo for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, strongly suggesting that corporate leaders needed to get politically involved and essentially take over everything from academia to our court system to our political system. In 1976, in the Buckley case, Powell began the final destruction of American democracy by declaring that when morbidly rich people or corporations own politicians, all that money that got transferred to the politicians wasn't bribery, but instead was constitutionally protected First Amendment defined, quote, free speech, unquote. Powell expanded that when he personally authored the decision in the 1978 Bellotti case, which acknowledges corporations as, quote, persons, unquote, with full access to the Bill of Rights, including their own, quote, free speech, unquote, right to own politicians. 5 corrupt and in the bag Republicans on the Supreme Court radically expanded that doctrine in 2010 with Citizens United. As a result, there's really very little democracy left in our democracy. Our votes are cast in districts so gerrymandered that a 50-50 electorate can produce a 70-30 outcome in congressional representation. Our laws are written, more often than not, by corporate lawyers, lobbyists, or representatives of billionaire wealth. And our media is owned by the same class of investor stockholders, so it's a stretch to expect them to do much critical reporting on the situation. In his book, The Decline of the West, first published in German in 1918 and then in English in 1926, Oswald Spengler suggested that what we call Western civilization was then beginning to enter a, quote, hardening or, quote, classical, unquote, phrase in which all the nurturing and supportive structures of culture would become instead instruments for the exploitation of a growing peasant class to feed the wealth of a new and strengthening aristocracy. I don't know about a peasant class, but certainly a precariat class. Culture would become a parody of itself. Average people's expectations would decline while their wants would grow, and a new peasantry would emerge. Well, maybe that's the precariat, the new peasantry, which would cause the culture to stabilize in a, quote, classic form, unquote, that while Spengler doesn't use the term, seems very much like feudalism, the medieval system in which the lord owned the land and everyone else was a vassal, a tenant who owed loyalty to the landlord. I don't know if that's quite what we have now, but certainly the billionaires operate as though they are lords and everyone around them serves them in some way as vassals. I was at one time close to someone who in turn was close to Soros. And the way he described the relationships of people around Soros to Soros, who, by the way, I met at one point, and who I thought was a very, very nice man. But still, the way people related to him was as if he was the Lord and they were his vassals. Or its more modern incarnation, fascism, a word that didn't even exist when Spengler wrote Decline. Going on with Hartman, I had gone on with Hartman in that last paragraph. Spengler considered himself an aristocrat. Didn't see this as a bad thing. In 1926, he prophesied that once the boom of the Roaring Twenties was over, a great bust would wash over the world, while this bust had the potential to create chaos. its most likely outcome would be a return to the classic, stable form of social organization, what Spengler calls, quote, high culture, unquote, and I call neo-feudalism and or fascism. He wrote, quote, in all high cultures, therefore, there is a peasantry, which is breed stock in the broad sense, and thus to a certain extent, nature herself, and a society which is assertively and emphatically, quote, in form, unquote. It is a set of classes or states, and no doubt artificial and transitory, but the history of these classes and estates is world history at highest potential, unquote. I'm not entirely sure what all that means, but 20th and 21st century cultural observers, ranging from billionaire George Soros in his book, The Crisis of Global Capitalism, to Professor Norina Hertz in The Silent Takeover, Global Capitalism and the Death of Democracy, have pointed to deep cracks in the foundational structure of Western civilization, traceable in part to the current legal status of corporations versus humans. More recently, Jane Mayer has laid out in painful detail in her book Dark Money how the Koch network and a few other political-minded billionaires have essentially taken over the entire Republican Party, as has Nancy McLean with her book Democracy and Chains. The extent of the problems within our political and economic structures are laid bare with startling and sometimes frightening clarity. As a result, all of these changes in our politics, most driven by 5 corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court, putting oligarchy above democracy. Aren't those 6 corrupt Republicans on the Supreme Court, by the way? Or does Thom Hartmann exempt John Roberts? That's an interesting question. Princeton scholars Martin Gillens and Benjamin Page famously found that the odds of average Americans' political desires being translated into policy are about the same as, quote, random noise, unquote, whereas what they refer to as, quote, economic elites, unquote, frequently get everything they want from the political class. They wrote that we still have the, quote, features, unquote, of democracy, like elections, but ended their paper with this cautionary note, quote, we believe that if policymaking is dominated by powerful business organizations and a small number of affluent Americans, then America's claims to being a democratic society are seriously threatened, unquote. It seems that America has arrived at the point Spengler saw in early 20th century Europe, and indeed there are some concerning parallels, excuse me, particularly with the late 1920s and early 1930s. Italy, Germany, and Spain all lost their democracies and moved to fascism during that era, while Spengler and his acolytes cheered. And indeed, it was one of FDR's biggest challenges in the 1930s, steering America through a, quote, middle course, unquote, between communism, which was then growing popular, and fascism, also growing popular. He pulled it off with small compared to Europe, nods to democratic socialism, instituting problems like Social Security, the minimum wage, and establishing the right to unionize, among other things. Mark Twain is often quoted as saying that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Many look at the all-out war being waged against American government by the hard right, from Trump and his cronies to the billionaire networks funding right-wing propaganda and lobbying outlets, and think, quote, it can't happen here. They're wrong. It can happen here. We now have police intervening in elections, privatized corporate voting systems, and a massive voter suppression campaign to prevent elderly, young, and non-white Americans from being able to vote. Meanwhile, Republican politicians and the billionaires who own them are now dropping any pretense at all to caring about the fate and future of our country's fiscal health, so long as they get and keep their tax cuts. In summary, what's left of our democratic institutions are under siege. Add to that a largely billionaire funded owned right wing media machine that's willing to regularly and openly deceive American voters, documented daily by Media Matters, and you have the perfect setup for a neo feudalist slash fascist takeover of government, or as President Carter so correctly called it, oligarchy. This year's election may be our last chance to push back against the oligarchy the GOP past 43 years. President Biden and Democrats in Congress made a valiant try with the For the People Act that would have expanded voting rights, outlawed gerrymandering, and reversed Citizens United to strip dark money out of our electoral system, was stabbed in the back by Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. If Biden is reelected and Democrats can take the House and hold the Senate, there's a very good chance, particularly without Manchin and Sinema to sabotage the process like they did in 2022, that such legislation can be brought up again, and pass. I don't know about that. The Senate race is going to be very, very close. And even if the Democrats take, the Senate, there are others of them because Manchin and Sinema who may be willing to sabotage, the process. People who come to mind are John Tester, if he, is reelected to the Senate. Chris Coons, of Delaware, who's in the pocket, of Joe Biden, but might want to step in the Joe Manchin role when it comes to doing things like getting rid of the filibuster, or voting against, the filibuster, or using the nuclear option to get, an exemption, from the filibuster. And we might need that to get the voting rights bill actually passed. Double check your voter registration, particularly if you live in a blue state, in a blue city, in a red state, where they're already purging millions of voters every month, and help everybody you know get their registration up to date. Now, democracy can't afford many more years of corruption before it's dead. The time to act is now. So clearly, I completely agree with Tom about that. For more than a year now, I have been emphasizing very, very strongly the idea, of dump the corruption. I believe that Tom is far too optimistic in thinking that a number of minimal changes, to the Senate are going to bring us back, the Voting Rights Act, and even if they do bring us, the Voting Rights Act, that alone is not going to end things. What we also need to do, obviously, is to get rid of the filibuster in Congress and get rid of money in politics. Changing the Voting Rights Act won't get rid of money in politics. Now, Tom is very, very intelligent about using certain aspects of the political system to actually get things going again. For example, he, like myself, generally talks about or frequently talks about Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, which deals the Supreme Court out, of many decisions. So that can be very important because once you get, a Congress that is friendly to the idea of getting this country going again, there's a lot that you can do if you pass laws that exclude the appeals courts of the United States from reviewing those particular laws. But the first step is to get such a Congress and to get a presidency that is not beholden, to big money. And Tom knows about the importance of big money too, because he often writes about the corruption engendered by big money, and he mentioned it, okay, in the previous article. But let us go now to the rule, which I constantly talk about. Let me find the rule. Here it is. The rule is the antidote because it expels big money from politics. And the rule says vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corporations, from wealthy individuals, from PACs, or from party committees. Why party committees? Because the PACs use the party committees to basically launder their money. So the money comes to candidates from the party committees and not from the PACs, and who repudiate all super PAC support. Increasingly, in recent elections, we've seen a huge role of super PACs. In the next few days, we'll be talking about, for example, the role, okay, of AIPAC and its PACs and super PACs. The role they plan to have in the election of 2024 in defeating those few candidates who are opposed to U.S. foreign policy, okay, in the Middle East, who specifically favor respecting Palestinian rights, who favor a Palestinian state, generally speaking, a solution that's two-state, okay, solution. Okay, so AIPAC is using its big money, a war chest of $90 to $100 million, to try to defeat those candidates in 2024. A lot of that money is going to be spent by their super PAC, the United Democracy Project. Okay, so candidates have to repudiate super PAC support, okay, as well. So to repeat the rule, vote against every candidate except those who won't take money from wealthy corporations, individuals, PACs, or party committees, and who repudiate all super PAC support. We need a movement. We need to create a movement. We need Tom Hartman to get on board and others who think like him to get on board with this movement. And that movement has to be one that teaches the voters before the election of 2024 to vote against the candidates taking the big money. Those candidates include, of course, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and any replacements that come forward for them, representing the establishment of the two parties. It will also eliminate some third-party candidates. For example, if there is a no-labels candidate this year, if Joe Manchin gets to be a no-label candidate, you can rest assured he'll be taking all kinds, okay, of big money. On the other hand, Green Party candidates never take big money. I don't know where the Libertarian candidates stand. Traditionally, they've been the party, have been the party of the Koch brothers, so their candidate may take some big money too. But the point is, find the candidates of the parties who don't take big money and vote for them. If you do that in 2024, you'll clean out the whole House of Representatives. You'll clean out 1/3 of the Senate. You'll clean out, okay, the presidency, and then you will get legislation that will deal the Supreme Court out of judicial review on vital issues. We'll be able to get all kinds of vital policies through. Beginning in 2025, we'll be able to get a Medicare for All policy through. We'll be able to get a climate emergencies policies through. We'll be able to get all manner of things, child tax credits and voting rights, Supreme Court expansion, all kinds of vital things through. But we have to dump the corruption by using the rule. And that, of course, is the message of this particular stream. So, We have here Dolores Pierce. Thank you, Dolores, for coming. We have L. Stephen Day, George Galloway. Quote, I call on the great people of Egypt, the beating heart of the Arab world. The Egyptian army should immediately occupy the Palestinian town of Rafah to avert the imminent danger of genocide there. More than 1 million refugees are at severe risk of mass slaughter. Yes, I agree. Hashtag Gaza, hashtag ICJ, hashtag UN, hashtag countdown, hashtag ceasefire. So those are the only comments I see so far. So in closing, okay, I'm going to say that I'll be having second and third streams today. My streams, okay, I'll have a stream in the 4 o'clock hour, which will be under the neoliberalism category that I stream under. And that will talk about a new Substack piece by Stephanie Kelton called Sacred Cows. I've already scheduled that. Okay, I have to tweet it out yet and put it on Facebook. Okay, but I certainly will do that. I'm also going to have a third stream. I can tell you now that will be probably after 8 p.m. sometime, and will probably be coordinated with Dee Pierce. So if she's having an 8 p.m. show tonight, then my stream will probably be at 9 p.m. or so. If she's having a 9 p.m. show, then my stream will be at 8, okay, or 8:30. I'm sure my stream will be under a half hour. So I'll see you then later today for 2 more streams in the indicated times. Have a great afternoon until I see you again.